We talk a lot on this show about how artists make money in the changing music industry. So today, we wanted to talk about how artists at all different levels can and do give back to causes they believe in. Welcome to The Future of What? I'm your host, Portia Sabin, president of the independent record label Kill Rock Stars. Today, we'll talk about how artists can be activists no matter what stage of their career they're at. From Mike McCready of Pearl Jam, a career musician in a famous band, to Liv Bruce and Ben Hopkins of Power Bottom, a band who just released their first full-length. It's all coming up on The Future of What?
Can I have a taste of your ice cream? Can I lick the crumbs from your table? Can I interfere in your crisis? No, mind your own business. No.
You're listening to The Future of What? We're talking to Mike McCready of Pearl Jam. Thanks so much for joining us on The Future of What?
Thank you, Portia. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
So I'm excited to talk to you. Our topic today is artists giving back.
Mhm.
And I've talked to some people so far about sort of how they started realizing that they wanted to help other people when they got to a certain level.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you about sort of the process of that for you guys.
I think in terms of giving back with our band and our individuals that are in this band, when we started to see some sort of success, we kind of felt, at that time that this is a good measure of how we could give back because we have a lot. Now we're blessed with kind of an abundance of success early on. And, there's so much out there that I maybe growing up in the Northwest, we were, aside from Eddie, but he's very, in tune with kind of the similar values that we all have in terms of giving back to, organizations that need help, whether it be like local social services or women's services, or it could be a myriad of many things. But it started right around the beginning of our career, I'd say, as when the record started selling. And I think, we always kind of had a giving back kind of a feel to us anyways, but it just got bigger and bigger as our band kind of got bigger. Does that make sense? I don't know if that sounds
Absolutely.
but
And
yeah.
no, it's totally true.
Yeah.
And, I'm old enough to have lived through the beginning of your band. And that really was a time, people who didn't necessarily live through that time won't have as visceral an experience of it. I mean, we were coming out of the 80s when things were very glam, things were very like,
Yeah.
big hair and to have, bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, which were like people wearing their, regular street clothes and just playing great
Yeah.
rock. It was a real sea change, and it really did feel closer. It was a very punk thing. In Olympia, I'm not from Olympia, but my husband started the record label Kill Rock Stars in Olympia. So it was like Bikini Kill
Cool.
and Unwound and
Sure.
these bands that were really just like, local people making things happen. It felt very personal. It felt very like, yes, you are a real person. And yes, you do have, you're not this removed rock star.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of that value system, in terms of the Seattle bands that had come out at that time, much like the Olympia bands, I'm guessing, was that it was a do-it-yourself kind of thing. Growing up in the 80s in Seattle, there was not a lot of major bands that would there were some, but a lot of bands would pass over Seattle. They'd go from Portland directly to Vancouver. And so, we missed a lot of stuff. And, we were aware of things there, but you kind of had to put on your own shows. There wasn't a ton of places to play. The city looked down on it. You had to have $1 million insurance policy. It was insane, the kind of silly hoops you had to jump through. I had a little band called Shadow. We were a metal band out of there. And so it was like that, and then Green River, of course, and then all those bands. Everybody had to put on their own shows, and that was maybe how we got to know each other and got to like kind of support each other, maybe, instead of, there's a healthy competition in terms of the bands. I'm not talking about the giving back necessarily, but we would, we'd take care of each other and play on each other's shows, go to each other's parties and stuff, because it was so small.
Yeah.
But I think that, growing up in the Northwest, whether it's Olympia, Portland, or Seattle, you're attuned to the environment and like, well, maybe we should do something about the Puget Sound being cleaned up, or, social services in downtown Seattle for the homeless, or Mary's Place, or anything like that. You're kind of aware of those things. I guess more so, in terms of the bands that were coming out of the 80s and stuff, that was a different thing. It was more of excess and, how much can you spend and how crazy can you get? And, that wasn't the case with the bands that came out of the Northwest, I believe.
I think you're totally right. And it's so funny to hear you say that there used to be a time when Seattle was not a destination for bands to play because the city made it difficult. But it's so crazy. Nowadays, everyone's like, oh my God, Seattle, music mecca.
Isn't that funny, Portia? I mean, when I think of, not to harp on that too long, but when I think about, there was always the blue laws or whatever. The all-ages shows were basically impossible to put on in Seattle unless you had $1 million insurance policy, and I forget how you even got that. And then you have to rent 2 cops. This was like in 81 or 82, and to play unless you had a kind of a promoter, which there weren't a lot of them at the time. And you couldn't drink and be in the club at the same time as you could in Portland.
God.
You know what I mean? You could have or in LA, you could have a wristband if you're 18. You could be in a bar.
Isn't that nuts?
You couldn't do that in Seattle forever. Still can't do it, actually. Come to think of it.
So many things have grown out of there. I mean, like you're saying about activism, it's a very activist town, with the Vera Project starting and overturning the teen dance ordinance, and just so much has happened.
God, the teen dance ordinance, I remember when that came along. Great. It's like, what is it, the 50s? Like,
it was Footloose.
But you're right, though. Vera was an antidote to that, or an outcropping of that. And it showed the city of Seattle or whoever that was against all that, like, look at people can put on these all-ages shows and be respectful or whatever, being respectful, but, actually just do it because they want to do it,
Exactly.
And that was a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
To see that happened. And which happened in Olympia, too. I mean,
oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I didn't live there in the actual heyday of the very early 90s when everything was kind of going down, but it has always been an incredibly supportive scene, I mean, really, I remember when the kids from the Gossip, who eventually became the Gossip, moved to Olympia just because they loved Bikini Kill, just because they loved, certain bands that were from there. And they were like, 17 years old. And they were like, we're going there because that's going to be amazing.
That's awesome that was a destination. It's such just a small place,
From Arkansas. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be a big city for Arkansas. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In terms of
totally.
Well, then, Slater Kinney was out of there, and certainly that was, a large draw too. I'd imagine Bikini Kill. 7 Year Bitch, not from there. Are they from there?
I'm pretty sure they're from New York. I think so.
Are they really?
I think so.
You might be right.
I can't really remember. I just remember when I was in bands in New York, I used to see them wandering around the streets, which doesn't mean they started there, but I
what
think
band were you in?
I was in a band called the Hissy Fits in the 90s and 2000s.
Okay. All right.
Pop punk band out of New York.
Sweet. Can I find any stuff on it online or?
I think so. I'm not totally sure. We did have 2 albums, so I haven't really kept up with that. Maybe we're on iTunes. That's a good question. Mike, you're going to make me go look.
Okay.
No idea.
I'll go look myself too. So I'm a music historian freak. So
perfect.
Anyways,
go for it. Anyways, so yes, I agree with you that I think the Northwest really did have a different kind of a feel to it. It had a supportive, sort of community feel. And so you're right. It's not shocking to think that artists from the Northwest would be, first in line to be giving back. So the Vitalogy Foundation that you guys started seems really cool. And you guys do a lot of different things, right?
Yeah, how that started. It's going to be a little bit hard for me to explain, but I would love to give it the best explanation I can try to. But it was basically $1 to $2 off of every ticket we would sell at our shows. We would donate to, and we would have meetings and say, hey, this organization needs it. Treehouse, for an example, for kids that are in Seattle that need to get, free clothes and free kind of school supplies and stuff like that 5 times a year. So that's a good example of where we wanted to give some stuff. That was kind of my thing. And Jeff's was skate parks and building skate parks all around and Native American reservations. And Stones is very much parts of Conservation International, I think is one of his. And so at any rate, it morphed from us kind of voting on what we wanted to give it to splitting it 5 ways in terms of our band, maybe 6 ways now with our manager of like, okay, let's put on $3 extra per ticket, $2 to $3, and then split that 5 ways, and then we can choose which ones we can give to right now. And that kind of was an easier way to do it. We also did that kind of around the United States when we played locally and at different shows and find organizations that were maybe in Cleveland, and they were farming on the rooftops of Cleveland, and like little grassroots organizations. We would donate some of the ticket sales from that, those places when we were in those places.
Mm.
But Vitalogy now is primarily kind of the ones that the individuals in the band want to give to.
Awesome. It also says on the website that you can make a request for a grant. So there must be that option to some extent.
Yeah. And that would go through Nicole Vandenberg, and we vet all those organizations and the requests to see if they're, legitimate, and if they're if we're into it. And Nicole sent that out, and we'll all look at them and go, oh yeah, this is a cool one. Let's do that. And Stone, there's the one called Emergency Services, which is downtown, which takes care of homeless people just immediately on the street, or any kind of thing that's going on in the street, no questions asked. And that's a pretty cool one too. So mine's a Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. Some of it, I'm forgetting what they are right now, and they're all kind of, I have to look at the sheet again, but we figure it out every year, like what we want to give to.
Oh, so they can change every year?
They could, yes.
Oh, wow.
Or they can be added to, or yeah.
That's awesome.
It's not written in stone. It's malleable in terms of what needs help. It's a growing kind of organization or organism.
Right.
Itself,
it's like an amoeba, right? It's like sprawling.
Yeah, hopefully amoeba of good.
An amoeba of goodness. I love that. So I am friends with Tim Bierman. He and I are on the Grammys board, the Pacific Northwest chapter. He is rad. I love that guy.
Yeah, he's a good dude. Yeah.
And I interviewed him like at the first episode of this radio show, like a year ago or more, about his job, because he's got a really interesting job running your fan club.
Yeah.
And your fan club in general is fascinating because there's so much that you guys do just for fans. And I think that's a really cool aspect of giving back too.
Oh, yeah, Portia, I feel like that's part of the, the ethos, or if for lack of a better term, of, giving back that we were talking about earlier to outside organizations, but within Pearl Jam organizations within our fan club, and access to tickets, access to sales of things, and, to front row tickets too. I'm sure Tim explained more of it, but we're very, we're all fans of bands. So we like things like that growing up. When we were spending $7 for a ticket, you'd want to, or buy a record that had something cool in it. You always want a little bit of extra, but you want to kind of look out for the fan, because, ultimately they're going to come back, and they're what pay your bills, and you want to be as, not necessarily as accessible, but maybe, want them to have the best experience possible, I guess. And that's kind of how we look at it. And we make a big deal about it. And that's a thing that we talk about a lot. It's like, well, what should we do this year for the fan club? Or what do you think they would want? Or, we second guess it, or we third guess it, or we talk to Tim about it, and we listen to fans and what they want too. So there's a lot of interesting things that have come out of the fan club in terms of, there's these smaller organizations. There's one called the Wish List organization, which is run by this woman named Laura Trafton and some of her friends. And they're not directly associated with Pearl Jam, but they have come up through the ranks of the fans. And they will have little pre-parties around the United States while we're playing. They've done that just of their own thing. So in terms of the fans, our friends are very proactive in wanting to help people just go out and do it, and we don't have to ask them. And it's kind of interesting to see that whole thing arrive. There's a thing called Team McCready, I think, that has done some stuff, that has done that. So, but the Wish List is one of the bigger ones. But again, that's of their own. They came up. They're out of their own enthusiasm.
That's so great. And I mean, I like that because it implies that you guys are sort of spreading that just through your own, it's like you guys are doing good works. Your fans are picking up on that. They're doing good works. I mean, I love that. That makes it so worth it. I mean, I always say this business is a tough business because, when you're starting out as a young artist, you just are thinking about like, oh, I wish that someday I can make $1 doing this. Like, I just want to put out the song because I love songwriting. But I always say we're actually in the business. I mean, if I'm doing my job right, we're in the business of creating career artists. So it's so nice to talk to a career artist who, like, you got to do this your whole life, but you are a music fan and you are like someone who loved to listen to music and go to clubs and all that stuff that everybody loves to do, So you're a fan too.
always have been. I still am. I go to record stores and now I'm going to look up the hissy fits and figure out what that's all about. And, I'm going to probably go look through vinyl. And so I do all that's, I'm serious. I'm into, I love to find, the thing about me is I get caught in the 80s and the 90s in terms of like, in the, sorry, 70s, 80s, 90s in terms of music. And I get stuck in that. And then I need to know what's going on these days pretty much. I mean, I know a lot of bands now like Black Rebel Motorcycle Club and things like that, but I get caught in a thing where I need to get out of it. I don't know why I'm going on a tangent right now, but I get caught in like listening to certain music and then kind of I'll like all new wave for, a year. And it's like, I have to expand my horizons sometimes. So I like to hear about new bands.
Cool.
Even if they're,
old.
I don't know where I'm going with that. But,
even if they're old.
Yeah.
Well, Mike McCready, thank you so much for joining us today on The Future of What. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, no worries, Portia. Thank you so much.
Swing Low by The Gossip. If you're enjoying this program, please subscribe to our show on iTunes. To find out what's coming up next, follow us on Twitter at KRSFOW. You're listening to The Future of What? We're talking to Liv Bruce and Ben Hopkins of Power Bottom. Liv and Ben, welcome to The Future of What?
Oh my God, thank you for having us.
Hi, thank you so much. We're so excited to be here.
So today we have you here to talk about your tour writer and how did that all come about? Can you explain it for our listening audience, what you guys have been up to?
Basically, the idea started germinating when we played at a venue that had gendered bathrooms, and the signage basically was reducing gender identities down to body parts, which is violent and tacky and awful. And doing that is violent to trans people, but also really violent to anyone. But I was specifically concerned with the kind of trans unfriendliness of that. And I started thinking about it and thinking about if we ever played there again, bringing our own signs to cover the ones that the bathroom had. And then I was, well, I don't want to print out signs that say men's and women's on them, because that's not really the most politically exciting thing to me. What's politically exciting to me is gender-neutral bathrooms. And then I was like, well, what if we did that at every venue? Or what if we proposed that at every venue? And the idea kind of snowballed from there. That was the point where I started talking to our wonderful manager, Jeanette Wall, and our booking agent, Josh Lindgren, about it. And that's when then we started doing it. Pretty much as soon as we signed with the booking agent, we started doing it. And that's kind of the rough history of it.
And what's the reception been from venues? Basically, they read your tour writer and it says you need to have...
The response from venues, it varies. We get a lot of places that are happy to do it and completely understand. There are some places that we need to make more of a compromise with them due to kind of the existing architecture of the venue and kind of what they can do. And then there's some places where, due to some local law that's been on the books for like 200 years, we can't do it. But I was definitely surprised by how many venues were willing and able to meet that requirement. request of ours.
I feel like this is part of, our episode today. We're talking about artists who are either giving back or are being activists and having, causes that they support. And I feel like one of the craziest things about this whole conversation is that really people need to just communicate a lot of times. And I feel like people can act like human beings, and everybody seems to be really surprised by that. But, I think this is a really good example of that. It's like, just ask, just say, hey, listen, this is an issue that's important to us. Can you guys help us out with it? And like you say, most of the venues are able to do it if they can, because you haven't really gotten pushback from a venue who's like, no, we don't believe in that, right?
No, we haven't no one has ever looked me in the eye and said, I don't believe in that.
Right.
People, there are people who, it's such a complicated thing to put on a show in some ways, and there's a lot of people involved. So sometimes there will be like, oh, well, this venue is actually owned by someone who doesn't live in this city, and we would need to communicate with them about it, and we don't really know how to have that conversation. It's really, I think it brings up, I think sometimes when there's conflict around it, it's really nervousness on the part of someone who doesn't know if they have the authority to do that, or who wants to make sure that their job won't be in jeopardy, which I totally understand.
Yeah. Right.
And in a lot of those situations, what ends up working best is one of us having a conversation with that person once we get to the venue.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as you said, people talking face to face is usually the most efficient and effective way to get things done.
Right. Absolutely.
But that's not the default, because when you're on tour, you're obviously only in the city for a day. So
right.
When you're working out these details a week beforehand, you can't have that face-to-face conversation.
Right.
But yeah, usually the face-to-face is the best way to accomplish it.
So another aspect of this that's important is that you guys put in the rider is accessibility. So there need to be gender neutral bathrooms, but they also need to be accessible. So they can't be just off in some attic somewhere that takes 10 years to get there.
Yeah, like an obvious thing.
That was also informed by the venue that inspired this whole thing, because when I brought up my problem with the venue's bathroom sign to someone on site that day, they were like, oh, well, there's a bathroom for you people. It's just up the stairs. It was like up an unlit flight of stairs in a dark room. I think it was in a part of the venue that normally is occasionally used for shows, but it wasn't really part of the floor plan of the show that we were playing.
Right.
They're just like, oh, well, you can go there.
I like the use of you people too. That's nice.
As I said that, I realized I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. I don't know if that's specifically what was said
but that
to
was
me,
sort of the implication, right?
That was the implication, was, oh, you people can pee over here.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was something that I felt like was important to put into the language of that clause in the rider, that you can't just say, oh, your gender neutral bathroom is this bush in the backyard. That's not what they were actually saying to me, but that's hyperbole.
Right.
Really? That's hyperbole?
Yes. No, there was actually recently in the news, I said a bush in the backyard because there was a pundit recently who said, in response to conflict over, I think, North Carolina's bathroom bill, she was like, well, can't they just pee in the bushes?
Oh my God. Yeah.
There was a pundit who said that, and it's actually the woman who played the best friend in Clueless.
Oh, that's Stacey Dash.
Stacey Dash.
Yes.
Yeah, Stacey Dash.
Yeah, someone should smack her with a fish.
Have you noticed how the Republican Party has been falling back more and more on like washed up actors of the 80s and 90s, like Scott Baio at the convention? Like, what is going on, guys?
They don't have anyone else.
I hadn't noticed that trend, but it's totally real.
Yeah, I've definitely
it's a complete trend. I mean, how are you a political party where no musicians like you?
Yeah.
No musicians. They couldn't get one musician to play at the RNC. They had to have a house band.
Right. And then nobody wanted to let them use their actual, the music.
Song.
Yeah.
The whole thing is too funny. I mean, Donald Trump walking out to Queen, give me a break.
I know. Well, thank God.
Great. Gay man died of AIDS. Love that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Thank God that so few musicians are willing to give the Republican Party rights to their songs, because if they could get other people's songs more easily, we might have never gotten the Freedom Girls. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Like,
those are
the
nice.
3 girls lip syncing and dancing on stage, and that banger that they were singing, I loved it.
Yeah,
It was so good.
that's
Donald
amazing.
Trump's
Some I-
daughter has a song that's pretty good.
Really?
Yeah, I forget what it's called, but it's truly upsetting.
Wow.
It'll take the paint off the walls.
Well, his number one, he's got 100% support from the constituency of people who he's given trust funds to. You notice that? Like
Oh,
100% of his children are
Same.
like totally on board with
Same.
him.
Glad they're on board.
Yeah. Okay, Mike, we got derailed by Trump. I don't know how.
Always happens.
seems to happen a lot these days.
Oh my God. So yeah, can you talk about the crazy North Carolina bathroom laws for a second? I mean, do you guys have any thoughts on why bathrooms are suddenly the like new battleground area?
I think it's such a basic right. Do you know what I mean? Like, in its own way, it's like, as sort of gender nonconforming people like continue to establish like the fact that like we deserve basic rights, like a place to pee that is safe and respectful towards who like we identify as being.
Mm-hmm.
Like people, specifically Republicans, will you find any opportunity to like demonize us as like sexual villains or whatever. Like, I mean, that's what the big argument they have with these transgender bathrooms. They're like, well, I mean, I don't want my daughter to be assaulted by some man in the dress, which is like the most problematic thing, perhaps of all time. I don't know. It's this time-honored tradition of conservative people resisting change for the most basic things. I just like, if it wasn't bathrooms, it'd be something else like drinking fountains.
Oh, that's a sick comparison.
I think that it also just has to do with the fact that public bathrooms are the most commonly gendered public space.
Mm,
And so
that's a good point.
when your identity disrupts our cultural norms of gender, the first public place where that becomes an issue is a public restroom. But there's other gendered public spaces. There's a gym locker room, which is also something that is up for debate, or not up for debate, but I mean it's a current kind of battleground of this issue. But I think there are other gendered public spaces, like certain stores that like a store like Victoria's Secret or something. Those are also frontiers for this conversation that's being had about gender on a national level. But the first and most obvious one is bathrooms, just because they're the most commonly gendered space.
Absolutely. And this is part of a bigger discussion that I've been having for years and years, because my previous incarnation, I used to be an anthropologist and I did American culture.
Oh, shut up, really?
Yeah.
Logical, devolution into record label.
Yeah. It's a downward spiral. Don't get me started. But I used to always talk to my 101 classes about, colors in America. And, what would you do if you were, let's say you were a cis man and you went over to your male friend's house and he had a pink razor on his bathroom sink? What would you think? And everyone was like, well, that he had a girlfriend.
Right.
Right? Because it couldn't possibly be his. Because what would that mean about him to own a pink razor?
Yeah.
And it's like, it is that fundamental in our culture. It is literally the colors of things that you buy are gendered in a way that really upsets people, that gets people head up, when they think about it. So it's just such a massive conversation. But anyway, I could talk to you guys forever about this, but I don't want to take up your whole lives. So this is your first step. This is a very exciting, cool move that you guys are making an effort to be activists in this world, that this is just part of your daily lives. Like you go on tour.
Yeah.
There are bathrooms at the venue. You're trying to do this.
And it's almost like the effort, the question of effort, like this is one thing that I think, I don't know, I don't want to speak for Liv ever, but there's this question of like, is it that hard for us to do? And it's like, no, like, is it that much effort? Like, are we being that brave? The answer is no. I think we're just being respectful towards our fans and people who come to the show and people who share values that we do. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, being called an activist is a great boon for anyone's ego, and it's a fun thing to talk about at a dinner party. But demanding something as simple as a safe place for a gender non-conforming person to pee at one of our shows is, sure, it's activism, but it's truly just a basic gesture of decency. And it's like, it's incredibly flattering to be called an activist and everything like that, but really, I think there's so many more people who like organize, like do things like that, and like the least we can do for our people who want to come to our shows is just give them a safer space to see the show in.
Absolutely.
It's just basic human decency. Like, really, it is. I love having a big ego, trust, but like, I'm just saying, like, there's this thing about like, it's just a basic level of respect.
Yeah. And that's, but not everyone goes there. Not everyone chooses to do that.
Hopefully will soon.
Exactly. And I think that you can't say you're not leading the way in that way, which is pretty rad.
Well, that's very nice.
What's your next step? Do you guys have ideas about, like, if we were making lots of money on this, what would you do next? Like, do you have like an activism wish, like something that you could put into fruition? I
think accessibility at venues is something that we're very curious in, which is a harder issue to tackle because it's oftentimes an issue of architecture.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's unacceptable for a venue to have one bathroom up a flight of stairs. Like, that's just not okay because some people can't go up the stairs, you know what I mean, unassisted. It's the kind of thing of like really educating people on the sense that, like, to have a really cool, like, I don't know what anyone thinks is punk. Punk is this word that keeps me up at night because it's so frustrating. But I guess it's this idea of like all inclusivity of outsiders and stuff like that, quote unquote, whatever it means to be an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
And if a venue is to truly be punk, shouldn't it provide a place for like every kind of person to like have a good, respectful time at a show?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. And then I think accessibility is a big part of that.
Yeah, it's a good one. I like that one.
Yeah, I guess what's interesting to me right now is the kind of conversations that are being had around what the audience does during a show, and specifically about dancing versus moshing, and figuring out a way that people can, I don't know, have a good time doing what they want. Because I think there's this mistaken perception that it's only the awful bros who like to mosh, and that's not true. No. I've been to hardcore punk shows where I've seen people who aren't bros moshing, and I think that kind of something I'm interested in is figuring out how we can identify what exactly about that behavior is harmful or when it gets to be a problem, and figure out how we can allow it to exist in a healthy way and in a respectful way without creating a space where someone who just wants to go to a show to push people around can do that.
I love that idea because I miss moshing. When I was in my 20s, I used to mosh all the time. I missed it so much.
Right? Don't you miss it so much? It's so fun. And I feel like...
And it used to be such a thing. It used to be something that everybody could do at every show, and it wasn't scary, and it wasn't a problem.
I've had some amazing, amazing times moshing at shows, but I also... totally understand that it is a problem if people are having physical boundaries of theirs crossed.
Totally.
Because of moshing at a show.
Right.
And yeah, I want to figure out a way that this can all work. I want to figure out a way that people who want to be close to the band but don't want to mosh can do that. People who want to be close to the band but want to mosh can do that. People who don't want to be touched by bodies that are moving that way don't have to deal with it.
Right.
But I'm still not exactly sure how to do that, and that's kind of on the horizon.
That is a great one, and I would totally help you advocate for that because I miss it, and I remember it being such a big, fun part of going to rock shows for me when I was a kid because it was safe. I felt like I was not gonna get, you could go in if you wanted to, you could come out if you wanted to. You weren't gonna. The early 90s was this crazy time. I mean, I remember moshing at shows that you would never believe, like the bands, they were like pop bands and everybody's just like losing it and having this wonderful time. And it was because it was part of the culture. It was part of, the people went to see shows, the thing that people went to see shows for. But I never felt threatened. But then I think something happened. I think that it took a turn because really it has not been a thing in the last,
Yeah. Well, what I've always assumed is that what happened to moshing is that there were people that whole time throughout the, early 90s, throughout that whole time who were having their experience at a show worsened by the people moshing. And I think that those people finally got to be heard. And you could say that's because of the internet. You could say that's because of the current feminist practices that are happening in culture right now, being responsive to that. But I'm happy we finally get to hear from those people who weren't having a great time because of moshing. But now I want to figure out how we can maintain their safety and their comfort at shows, but also do this fun thing. That can be fun when it's done respectfully and when it's done safely.
Absolutely. And I will say for the record that the worst I ever got hurt at a show was a Duran Duran show. I got punched in the face by a bunch of 40-year-old ladies, like so bad. Oh my God. They were so excited about John Taylor and Simon Le Bon. They just were like freaking out and just wailed. I mean, they like ripped my dress off. They like punched me in the face. It was crazy. Never got that hurt in a mosh pit in my whole life.
Whoa.
So that's the next area of activism, clearly. We got to get these 40-year-old ladies under control.
We gotta rein in these 40-year-old ladies at the Duran Duran show.
We got to get rid of the Chardonnay at the show.
Yes, that is totally the problem, no doubt. Well, Liv Bruce and Ben Hopkins, what a pleasure it was to talk to the two of you. Thank you guys so much for coming on The Future of What?
Yeah, thank you so much.
I've been a fan for so long. I've loved all the albums you guys have put out over the years so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
My girl gets scared, can't take him anywhere. Every time he goes outside, he runs his mouth and he runs and hides all day and night. Ugly cherries bonafide all day and night.
That was Ugly Cherries by Power Bottom. If you're enjoying this program, please subscribe to our show on iTunes. To find out what's coming up next, follow us on Twitter at KRSFOW. You're listening to The Future of What? Last fall, we went to Washington, D.C. to participate in the Future of Music Policy Summit, where I interviewed Merrill Garbus of Tune Yards. Merrill told me that she was helped by an organization called RPM to set up a charitable fund. If you're in a band and want to give back but don't know how, go to revolutionsperminute.net. It's a company that provides artists with strategy and support for their activism and philanthropy. Here's part of that interview with Merrill. But speaking of, issues, do you want to talk about the water fountain a little bit?
Sure. So one thing that we've been able to do that's been one of those things on the tour bus that makes me feel connected is that we secretly add on $1 to every one of our tickets that we sell. We don't tell people that, but that's what's happening. And then we take that $1 and we put it in a fund. We raised a lot of money through that fund, and then we disperse that to different charitable organizations, nonprofits that we believe are doing great stuff. So on this last album, we wrote a song called Water Fountain, and it was a lot about, I live in Oakland, California, and, California is in the middle of a really big drought, and Oakland is also in the midst of a huge transition, I would say, in danger of losing a core of its community to gentrification and also deteriorating in its own ways, or at least when I was writing that song. So, and I just also gone to Haiti to spend a lot of time studying drumming there and learned a lot about the economy of Haiti as it pertained to the economy of my country, of the United States. So that song was grappling with all these things, and it became the song that a lot of companies were asking, for. It was the hit song of the album, and ironically was talking about a lot of anti-capitalist stuff. So it was like, Starbucks really wants your water fountain song for its new summer line of iced drinks. And I was like, that doesn't leave this room, by the way. That was a theoretical example. So I remember sitting in the record label office, I was like almost crying because they were like, you could win for you, blah, blah, thousands of dollars. You've written this great song and now you deserve to just, bathe in cash or whatever. And I kept saying no. I just said, no, this doesn't feel right. We used it for a couple of animated things, art, other pieces of art that feels, like a better way to use music for me. And then we got offered a big ad from Sonos to have our music be part of the Sonos sound system ad campaign. And they presented us this really great ad, and it was these cool looking rainbow Lego-looking building blocks filling a room. And Sonos is a great supporter of musicians and how to, that music is the essence of why they are in existence as a company. So we did a bunch of research, and RPM, RPM basically powers our little charitable fund. So we had them suss out, and I kept saying, no, it doesn't feel right to put this song in an ad. But finally I said, if you give us X amount, we're going to start a water charity with this. And they agreed. So we were able to take that big chunk of money and stick it in this fund, and now have dispersed that to several organizations that are doing work specifically with water, including water, drought issues for communities in Central California, the Gulf Restoration Network in New Orleans, and Partners in Health in Haiti. And we still have more to give. So to me, this really, is also this really cool link between art and activism that I always wanted to be part of Tune Yards. That when I built the music project, it always felt like this is music that wants to have a greater lens. It wants to look outward, out into the world. It doesn't want to be its own thing that is just about popularity and just about getting people to like my music. It wants to refract stuff that's happening around the world. And this has been, for me, something that's so selfishly satisfying. Every time I play a show, instead of saying like, oh, there are 500 people I have to play in front of, it's like, okay, $500 we made for the Water Fountain Fund, and that it really connects me with, again, my spiritual connection to music, my greater intention with music, and wanting to connect to people in that way. And certainly has also introduced me to a lot of people who are doing water activism around the world, which is great.
I saved up all my pennies and I gave them to this special guy. When he had enough of them, he bought himself a cherry pie. He gave me $1, a blood-soaked dollar. I cannot get the spot out, but it's okay, it still works in the store. Greasy man, come and dig my well. Life without your water is a burning hell. Stuff me up with your homegrown ice. Anything make me shit nice. And a 2-pound chicken tastes better with friends. A 2-pound chicken tastes better with two. And I know where to find you. So listen to the words I say. Let it sink into your head. My birdie go round and round and round. Now I'm in your bed. How did I get ahead? Woo! Then your fingers through my hair. Fingers through my hair. Give me a dress. Give me a breath. I'll give a thing a caress. Would you listen to the words I say? Sound like a bubble.
That was Water Fountain by Tune Yards. If you're enjoying this program, please subscribe to our show on iTunes. To find out what's coming up next, follow us on Twitter at KRSFOW. You're listening to The Future of What? We're talking to Coy Bowles of the Zac Brown Band. Coy, welcome to The Future of What?
Thanks for having me.
This is so cool to talk to you. So, today we are talking about artists who support causes and do things to give back to the community. And so you recently wrote a children's book, and the proceeds from that children's book are going to go to Camp Southern Ground. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Camp Southern Ground is Zac Brown's sort of lifelong project, dream. That's what I understand?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, actually. So I met Zac when I was we were both in college, probably a little after freshman year. And we were both playing music in the scene in West Georgia, was the name of the school, kind of on the edge of Georgia and Alabama, in a city called Carrollton.
Mm-hmm.
And we were both playing music, kind of bumped into each other there. He left Carrollton, moved to Atlanta. I kind of left Carrollton and moved to Atlanta. I went to school for music, and when I got out of school, I started looking through the paper. I was kind of forming my own band and was about to try to get my career off the ground with music, and I started looking through the paper, and everywhere you would look, you would see the Zac Brown Band's playing here, Zac Brown Band's playing there. And I had a good friend of mine who was playing in the band with Zac. So I started showing up at their shows, hanging out with them, talking and all this. And later on, Zac asked me to come out to his house to write some songs and hang and listen to music and whatnot. And he was living in east of Atlanta in this little small town. And I drove all the way out there, and after we got finished writing songs, it was probably 2 a.m, we got his flashlight and walked around his property, and he was like, this is where the camp is going to go. This is where this is going to go. This is where the pool is going to be. This is where the kitchen's going to be and all this. he had it all like worked out in his brain. And then he left that property and moved to a property in Smyrna. And then the camp moved from there to another spot. And he walked me around and showed me where that spot's going to be. And now it's in Fayetteville, Georgia, and it's really happening there. So ever since I've really started hanging out with him, he's had this dream in the back of his head where he can see it all laid out in his mind already, you know, which is really cool that it's coming to fruition now, you know.
That's amazing. And to think that he was so committed at such a young age. I mean, already you said you guys were just freshman year of college. So he was thinking about this even then. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think him being a camp counselor was a defining moment in his life as far as giving him direction and a kind of self-confidence and ability to be himself and be himself around other people that he was really looking for. Because if you start talking to him in depth about his life and whatever, there's kind of before he was in camps and then kind of after he was in camps. I think it really ignited a part of his brain, and ever since then, he's kind of wanted to be involved or have his own and be able to give that to other people as well, you know. So
yeah, that is very cool. So we're talking to you today because you wrote a children's book called Will Powers, Where There's a Will, There's a Way.
Yes. Yeah, this is my second children's book. So the first one was called Amy Giggles Laugh Out Loud.
Wow.
And it just kind of came from being on the road, and for years and years and years, you know, when we first started, it was 12 people, 2 dogs, and a trailer full of gear behind the bus, and we were all on one bus together, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very tight quarters. I mean, that would be equivalent to being like in the military on like a submarine or something, you know?
Right.
Like you're around each other constantly. And I've always wrote songs where I would go to my own room. I'm an only child, first of all, so I never grew up around brothers and sisters and having to share space like that. But then when I got older, I would write songs in my room by myself. And you kind of know when you're writing a good song is when you kind of feel some kind of emotional stirring, which usually ends up in like, you know, like tears or some kind of, you know, thing. But when you're on a bus with, you know, 11 other guys and there's no space, and, you know, you're in the back of the bus, you know, with the door shut, and they open it up to get their socks or something, and you're back there crying. You know, it's like, that's not the place you want to be, you know. So anyway, but I still wanted to write and be creative. So I kind of figured that I'll try writing songs in my head. And that turned into writing short stories, which turned into kind of developing this whole idea of me being a storyteller. I was thinking I was going to like direct the next like Scorsese movie or something, not like write a kid's book. So I went into this world of trying to figure out how you write kids books and how you get it done. And it was a long, bumpy road. And 2 years later, Amy Giggles came out, and without me really knowing it, it kind of had like an anti-bullying concept to it. I don't have kids, so I didn't know that bullying and anti-bullying was such a big thing in schools now, especially with social media and stuff. So when the book came out, it like really struck a chord with teachers and parents, and sold way more than I thought it was going to. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And so when I went to do the second book, which just came out April 19th, Will Powers, Where There's a Will, There's a Way, I wanted that book to be a follow-up to the Amy Giggles book in terms of it being relevant to what's going on in today's times with teachers and parents. So I went to a bunch of schools and sat down with teachers and principals and said, okay, guys, like, what's going on? Like, what's your issues? And like totally across the board, self-entitlement and work ethic was the two things that just kept popping up. Self-entitlement mostly. And I was like, wow, because I come from a family of, you know, like really hard workers. Like both of my parents and my whole family are kind of people who have been lower class and have struggled, and, you know, their only way of survival is just like, we'll work it to the bone kind of thing. So I come from that kind of background. So the idea of work ethic being something that was struggling with, you know, in today's kids was just kind of bummed me out. So I was like, well, I'll write a story about that. So anyway, Will Powers is out now, and it's getting great response from teachers and parents, because I think that me focusing really hard on it being relevant to what's going on in today's society with kids, and there being an issue with work ethic and self-entitlement. So hopefully it'll help. I mean, I can't think of anything cooler than helping teachers and helping parents make kids, have better core qualities,
Absolutely. And I think I think everything you say is absolutely true. And I'm not surprised to hear that those are the qualities that teachers report kids lacking today. Because we talk about this a lot on this show, that, we have a problem in American culture because what we see on TV is success. We don't see the hard work that it took to get there. We have these kids who think that, you're good at basketball, so then you go into the NBA. They don't see the hundreds and thousands of hours of practice that people put in.
Yeah. Millions of layups later. Yeah.
Exactly. Drills and, unpleasant things you don't want to do.
Especially in the music industry, man. It is a hustler's game, like especially Zach with his camp thing. I mean, it's just unbelievable the amount of man hours he's put in, flying around, meeting people, trying to get this big idea put together, and the right people and the right amount of money, and the organization of it all is just that in itself. Much less being one of the most successful bands playing right now and touring the world and all this other stuff, and having wife and kids and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's very cool what you're doing, and Willpower's Where There's a Will, There's a Way is available right now. Coy Bowles, thank you so much for joining us today on The Future of What?
Awesome. Thank you very much.
And that's our show. The music we played today was used by permission. You heard Power Bottom, Tune Yards, The Gossip, and of course, our theme song, Mind Your Own Business by the Delta 5. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. For more info on our shows, check out our website at killrockstars.com/thefutureofwhat. Our program was engineered by Brent Asbury at Beta Petrol and is produced by Will Watts and Anna McLean. I'm Portia Sabin, president of Kill Rock Stars. See you next week.